The awakening of an empath doesn't start with a bang or a grand announcement. It starts with a quiet, bone-deep exhaustion that sleep cannot fix. For years, you've navigated the world like a human radio tower, picking up every signal, every frequency, and every unspoken emotion in the room. You walked into spaces and instantly decoded the tension in a coworker's shoulders or the forced lightness in a friend's voice. You became a master at reading the room while completely losing the ability to read yourself. You were so busy translating everyone else's emotional language that you forgot your own native tongue. This sensitivity felt like a gift because it allowed you to connect, but it was actually a burden because it forced you to carry weight that wasn't yours. The turning point arrives when you realize that connection shouldn't feel like a heavy backpack you can never take off. You finally stop mistaking chaotic, draining dynamics for deep soul bonds. You realize that true connection is rooted in peace and emotional intelligence, not in how much of someone else's storm you can weather. This transition is a deeply conscious move from emotional survival to emotional mastery. In the past, you functioned on autopilot, reacting to every emotional ripple around you. If someone was sad, you felt it. If someone was angry, you absorbed it. You weren't living your life, you were managing theirs. When you reach this awakening, you aren't suddenly becoming cold or rejecting people. Instead, you are staging a rescue mission for your own soul. You are reclaiming the hours of mental energy you spent replaying conversations and wondering how you could have been better or more helpful. You are beginning to understand that your heightened sensitivity is a precision tool meant for discernment, not a vacuum meant to suck up everyone else's toxic energy. It is a shift in focus, moving the spotlight off the world and onto your own internal landscape. To understand why you are so tired, you have to look at the biology of your empathy. What you've called kindness for most of your life has actually been a form of hypervigilance. Neuroscience shows us that when you are constantly scanning for emotional shifts in others, your brain stays locked in a threat state. You've been living in a constant loop of survival conditioning, where your nervous system is always on high alert, waiting for the next drop in someone's mood so you can rush in to stabilize it. Your brain has been trained to believe that if you can keep everyone else happy and calm, then, and only then, are you safe. This is emotional overextension in its purest form. You've been running an emotional marathon every single day with no finish line in sight. This hyper-awareness of others developed so early in your life that it became your default setting, leaving your own self-awareness to collect dust. The true transformation begins with a simple, radical shift in the questions you ask. For the first time, you stop looking at a struggling person and asking, "How can I fix this for them?" And you start looking inward and asking, "What am I feeling right now?" This one question changes everything. It creates a boundary where there used to be a blur. It forces you to distinguish between feeling someone's pain and taking responsibility for it. You can acknowledge that someone is hurting without feeling like you have to be the one to heal them. You start to see that emotional generosity without self-preservation isn't noble, it's self-neglect. You finally stop measuring the depth of your love by how much pain you can endure for someone else. You realize that endurance is for marathons, not for healthy relationships. By choosing peace over the constant threat of other people's moods, you finally give your nervous system permission to stand down. Empaths are famously and often dangerously loyal. You are the one who stays in the room when everyone else has walked out. You are the one who continues to provide cover for someone's bad behavior long after they've run out of excuses. For you, loyalty has always felt like a badge of honor, a testament to your depth and your ability to see the good in people even when they aren't showing it. You forgive when apologies never come, and you hold on to connections that have long since turned toxic, believing that your endurance is a sign of strength. But here is the hard truth. Staying in a sinking ship doesn't make you a hero. It just makes you a casualty. True emotional maturity isn't measured by how much dysfunction you can tolerate or how many insults you can swallow. It is measured by how effectively you protect your internal peace. If your loyalty requires you to abandon yourself, it isn't loyalty anymore. It's a hostage situation. When you are always the listener, but never the one being heard, your relationship has become a one-way street. You become an emotional dumping ground for others, and that isn't a connection, it's an imbalance. Loyalty without reciprocity is just self-sacrifice disguised as virtue. You have to realize that you are not a bottomless well of support. You are a human being with a finite amount of energy. If you are constantly pouring into others while your own cup remains empty, you will eventually burn out. Redefining what it means to be loyal doesn't mean you are becoming cold, mean, or cynical. It means you are becoming discerning. You are starting to understand that your time, your heart, and your mental space are high-value assets that should only be invested in people who respect them. You are learning that a healthy relationship is built on mutual effort, not on your singular capacity to absorb someone else's discomfort. This is where the concept of boundaries becomes your greatest tool for survival. Many empaths fear the word boundary because they think it means building a cold stone wall to keep the world out. In reality, a boundary is simply an instruction manual for how to love you without breaking you. It's a clear guideline that says, this is where I end and you begin. When you start saying things like, I need some space right now, or I'm not in a place to discuss this today, or even a simple, that doesn't work for me, it's going to feel incredibly uncomfortable at first. You might feel a wave of guilt or a fear that you are being difficult, but you must reframe that feeling. That discomfort isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It is the literal sound of your self-respect growing. It's the feeling of your spine straightening after years of bending over backward to please everyone else. Asserting your needs is a vital part of developing a strong self-concept. In the past, you sought validation through your availability. You thought that being easygoing and having no requirements made you more lovable. The opposite is actually true. When you have no boundaries, you attract people who thrive on taking, and you push away the people who actually value balance and respect. By setting limits, you are essentially running a diagnostic test on your relationships. You get to observe who respects your no and who tries to guilt trip you for having it. This observation is pure data. It tells you exactly who belongs in your inner circle and who was only there for the free emotional labor. In this new phase of your life, you stop equating love with self-abandonment. You recognize that staying in an emotionally draining dynamic doesn't prove how deep your heart is. It just proves how little you value your own life. Your loyalty becomes selective, intentional, and grounded in the radical idea that you are just as worthy of protection as anyone else. The exhaustion you feel after a long day of dealing with people isn't all in your head, and it isn't just a sign that you're tired. It is a physiological SOS from your nervous system. As an empath, your body is a highly tuned instrument that reacts to emotional energy just as clearly as it reacts to physical touch. When you are constantly exposed to emotional volatility, unpredictability, or the heavy vibe of a toxic person, your body doesn't just watch from the sidelines, it enters the fray. It triggers a stress response that pumps cortisol and adrenaline through your veins, keeps your heart rate slightly elevated, and forces your muscles into a state of permanent contraction. You've been living in a state of high alert for so long that tight has become your new normal. This is why your shoulders are up to your ears and your jaw is perpetually clenched. Your body is trying to protect you from an invisible threat, And over time, this constant activation quietly drains your life force, leaving you feeling hollow and brittle. You have to start treating your physical symptoms as hard, objective data. When you get a pounding headache every time you hang up the phone with a certain relative, or when you feel a wave of sudden, unexplained fatigue after a meeting with a drama-prone colleague, that is your body giving you a report. It's not an overreaction, it's communication. Your nervous system is literally telling you that the environment you're in is costing you more than you can afford to pay. Instead of intellectualizing the situation or telling yourself that you're just being sensitive, you need to start respecting these signals as absolute truths. If a person or a place makes your stomach knot up or your chest feel tight, that is your intuition speaking through your biology. Your body knows the truth about a connection long before your mind is willing to admit it. By ignoring these cues, you aren't being strong, you're being a bad landlord to the only home you'll ever truly have. Managing your emotional state is impossible if you refuse to manage your environment. You cannot find inner peace if you are constantly putting yourself in the middle of a war zone. This means you have to start making choices that look boring or selfish to outsiders, but are actually essential for your survival. Choosing a quiet night at home over a loud, chaotic social gathering isn't an antisocial move, it's a regulatory one. Choosing to walk away from a conversation that is circling the drain of negativity isn't rude, it's self-preservation. Solitude is the charging station for the empath's soul. In the silence, away from the constant noise of other people's needs and demands, your nervous system finally gets the signal that it is safe to stand down. You are giving your heart rate a chance to slow and your cortisol levels a chance to drop. You are shifting from survival mode back into living mode. The most profound part of this shift happens when you stop being the emotional mediator for everyone in your life. For years, you've acted as a human buffer, trying to soften the blows between people and smooth over every conflict to keep the peace. But by doing that, you've been standing in the way of other people's growth. When you step back and refuse to stabilize the emotional storms of others, two things happen. First, you finally get the space you need to breathe. Second, you allow those people to finally confront their own messy patterns and the consequences of their behavior. You are no longer the shock absorber for their dysfunction. This creates a psychological clearing where calm isn't just a rare visitor, it becomes your permanent resident. You begin to realize that peace isn't just the absence of conflict or noise, it is the physical presence of internal safety. It's the feeling of your body finally letting go because it knows, for the first time in a long time, that you actually have its back. The final stage of your transformation is the most powerful because it is the quietest. It's the art of detaching from anything or anyone that disrupts your inner stability. In the past, you might have thought that leaving a situation required a massive blow-up, a long list of grievances, or a dramatic confrontation to prove you were done. But true detachment isn't fueled by anger, and it isn't an act of revenge. It is guided by something much deeper, alignment. You finally reach a point where you realize that your peace of mind is a non-negotiable asset. You stop looking for justice or an apology that will likely never come, and you start looking for the exit. This isn't about being mean or cold. It's about recognizing that you are finally moving in a direction that certain people simply cannot follow. You aren't pushing them away so much as you are choosing a path where they no longer fit. One of the most liberating parts of this stage is that you finally drop the heavy burden of over-explaining. For years, you probably spent hours crafting the perfect text or rehearsing the perfect speech, hoping that if you just found the right words, the other person would finally get it. You wanted them to see your heart, to understand your pain, and to respect your boundaries. But the awakening brings a sharp, cold clarity. Some people are committed to misunderstanding you because your confusion serves their interests. When you realize this, the need to justify yourself simply evaporates. You understand that your energy is finite. It is a limited resource, like water in a drought. You can no longer afford to waste a single drop trying to repair a connection that the other person is intent on breaking. You stop arguing, you stop defending, and you stop trying to convince people of your worth. You simply accept that their version of you is none of your business. This shift doesn't require an explosive confrontation or a final talk. Instead, you simply stop volunteering your emotional labor. You become the CEO of your own energy. You start shortening the phone calls that revolve around their endless drama. You stop being the first one to reach out. You decline the invitations that feel like obligations rather than genuine connections. You aren't making a scene, you are making a withdrawal. Your absence becomes your boundary. This is often more powerful than any words you could ever say. By quietly stepping back, you are no longer providing the fuel for their dysfunction. You aren't being passive-aggressive, you are being protective. You are reclaiming the mental real estate that used to be occupied by their chaos, and you are using it to build a life that feels safe and grounded. There is, of course, a level of grief in this process. Even when a connection is toxic or draining, it can still be painful to let it go. You might find yourself mourning the person you wish they were, or the future you imagined you'd have together. You might feel a pang of sadness when you see something that reminds you of them. But here is the hallmark of your growth. You allow yourself to feel that grief without letting it talk you into returning to the fire. You understand that mourning a connection is a natural part of healing, but it isn't a sign that you made a mistake. You don't mistake missing them for needing them. You carry your calm as the ultimate evidence of your growth. You no longer need to carry anger as a shield or a weapon to prove you are strong. Your strength is now found in your composure, the quiet, steady power of someone who knows exactly who they are and refuses to let anyone pull them back into the storm. For far too long, your identity wasn't something you owned. It was something you performed for the benefit of others. You weren't just a friend or a partner, you were a professional crisis manager. You were the designated mediator in every family feud, the 2 a.m. listener for every heartbreak, and the emotional first responder who rushed to soften the blow whenever life got hard for those around you. You became so addicted to being needed that you started to mistake being useful for being loved. You felt a sense of purpose only when someone else was in chaos, and you felt indispensable only when you were fixing someone's broken world. But this role, while it felt noble, was actually a cage. It kept you small, and it kept you focused entirely on the external world, while your own inner life was left to wither. The most terrifying and liberating question you will ever face is this: who are you when the world is quiet and no one needs saving? When you finally stop rushing to the rescue, you are met with a silence that can feel incredibly uncomfortable at first. Without a crisis to manage or a person to stabilize, you might feel aimless, as if you've lost your North Star. But in that silence, something miraculous begins to happen. You finally have the bandwidth to encounter the parts of yourself that you've postponed for decades. You discover that you have your own creativity that isn't about solving someone else's problem. You find that you have ambitions that have nothing to do with being the reliable one. You realize that you are allowed to rest without having to earn it through exhaustion. This is the moment you stop shape-shifting to match the emotional climate of the room. You no longer have to be the chameleon who changes colors just to keep the peace. You start to realize that harmony at the expense of your own authenticity is just a pretty name for a lie. Reclaiming your identity means you finally stop asking for permission to exist. You begin to express your preferences, your dislikes, and your dreams without scanning the room to see if everyone else approves. You stop filtering your every word through the question, how will this affect them? And start asking, does this reflect me? You begin to understand that while empathy is a beautiful trait you possess, it is no longer the only currency you use to pay for your place in the world. You are allowed to be complex, flawed, and even difficult sometimes. You are allowed to have needs that have nothing to do with caregiving. When you stop being a professional caretaker, you finally step into the role of an authentic individual. You are no longer a support character in everyone else's movie. You are the lead in your own. As you stabilize in this new identity, your entire social circle begins to shift in a way that feels like a natural law. Because you are no longer magnetized by intensity or attracted to people who only want a fixer, the dynamic of your relationships undergoes a radical upgrade. When you stop over-explaining and over-functioning, the people who are only there to consume your energy will naturally drift away. Not because you're mean, but because they no longer find what they're looking for in you. What remains, and what you eventually attract, are people who operate from a place of emotional accountability. You end up aligned with individuals who don't need a hero or a savior, but who are strong enough to stand firmly beside you. These are the connections where silence feels comfortable rather than tense, and where you are valued for who you are, not just for what you can do for them. You finally discover that the greatest gift you can give the world isn't your labor, it's your true, undivided self.